brutish, primitive, barbaric, honorable. These are just some words that are often used to describe the race of orcs. While the concept of orcs has been around for a long time, such as the monstrous beings of various mythologies to the pigmen in the literature of William Hope Hodgson, it was J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, who solidified the idea of a savage race of warriors under the employ of a powerful villain. Orcs have changed over the decades since they were first depicted in literature, and now run the gamut from ferocious plant or fungal monsters to an honorable tribe of warriors with some resemblance to indigenous peoples from around the world. Anyway, before we begin the discussion about our favorite warlike race in this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications if you want more content like this. It was Tolkien himself who used the word orc in the context we know today as the savage henchman race of a powerful tyrant. Before that, it was more common to use trolls or goblins in various stories as servants of a villain or demon. That said, in many of said stories, trolls and goblins look exactly like orcs as we see them today and can be used interchangeably. Actually, even Tolkien himself sometimes used the word goblin to refer to orcs. In any case, the word orc shares the same root word with ogre and is why the said creatures are sometimes thought to resemble one another. In the tabletop RPG Shadowrun, ogres are actually a genetic offshoot of orc, but we'll discuss that a little later on in the video. When Tolkien first envisioned his orcs, they were simply savage creatures that were recruited by the villain Morgoth and later Sauron, the Lord of the Rings himself, to be shock troops. Tolkien is a little vague on their origins and, unlike with the rest of the creatures he reimagined, such as the dwarves, elves, and hobbits, he didn't bother to keep track of their history. One of his musings postulate that the orcs are actually corrupted elves and may have once been beautiful to look upon, but Morgoth mutilated them and turned them into monsters. Another theory is that they are evil men who, through their greed and savagery, became monstrous beings who sought only to consume and destroy. In any case, Tolkien himself was somewhat conflicted by their existence because of his Catholic beliefs. For one thing, he wanted his orcs to be redeemable beings, as he believed in Jesus' teachings that all can be saved so long as they turn away from their evil ways. Unfortunately, due to his age at the time, J.R.R. Tolkien, the father of modern fantasy, left his work on the orcs undecided and never once featured a heroic orc in any of his stories. In Tolkien's stories, orcs were often short, about as tall as your average hobbit, which was between 3 to 4 feet, distinctly bow-legged, and had strange pigmentations from green, pale, and sallow. They were good at engineering siege weapons, but they couldn't really create something original, and often stole schematics from humans or dwarves to create their own war machines. Later on, another big name in the fantasy genre, Gary Gygax, creator of the astoundingly prolific Dungeons & Dragons tabletop RPG, took in the orcs and made them to fit in his own fantasy world. It should be noted that Gygax was one of the first to make orcs porcine or pig-like, and thus appear to have upturned noses and tusks as depicted in various books. Orcs were still mostly evil in the early editions of Dungeons & Dragons, but since they were role-playing games, questions began to be thrown around about orcs. For instance, just as Tolkien often wondered, could orcs become good and join a party of heroes? This was then that various players also began asking if they could play as orcs themselves, as a departure from playing as heroic races like elves and dwarves. It would be in later editions of Dungeons & Dragons, as well as new settings like Eberron, that would introduce the idea of orcish player characters. The game Pathfinder, which can be thought of as a re-release of Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, embraced the idea of heroic orc players, and even created a history for them. Other creators that would explore the idea of orcs is that of Games Workshop, the famous, or rather infamous, creators of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000. In this continuity, orcs are a race of humanoids who are actually part fungus. They are often referred to by male pronouns, but they aren't exactly male since they reproduce through spores, much like mushrooms. Whenever an orc dies, or anywhere they go actually, they shed spores that eventually grow into full-grown orcs accompanied by their goblin slaves and squigs which serve as their mounts, hounds, and livestock. Orcs in both Warhammer Fantasy and 40k cannot be considered good, as their sense of morality is simply too skewed to align with that of humanity. To them, fighting for the sake of fighting is their ultimate goal and care very little for other details. So to them, they don't fight humans and other races because of any grudge or malice. They fight simply because they think it's fun, and dying is simply part of the joys of fighting. Another creator that further modified the concept of orcs would be the Shadowrun tabletop RPG, which was originally created by FASA, but would later be purchased by Catalyst among other intellectual properties. In the world of Shadowrun, which is actually our history with just a little difference, orcs are just another offshoot of the human race. They were brought about along with other supernatural races such as elves, dwarves, and trolls when a comet passed by the earth. The orcs of Shadowrun are very human-like, save for often having muscular physiques, pointed ears, and prominent tusks jutting from their lower jaws. In temperance, they aren't all that different from humans at all, but because of certain hormonal imbalances found in their bodies, they tended to be aggressive and have the greatest potential for violence. That said, in the dog-eat-dog world of Shadowrun, violence is often the only option available to people regardless of their genetic heritage. Computer games like Warcraft and later on World of Warcraft and Elder Scrolls, which would include the much-acclaimed Skyrim, would later give orcs in-depth and interesting cultures. In the case of Warcraft orcs, they were given a shamanistic culture that would go on to include communicating with the elements of fire, water, earth, and air. The orcs of Elder Scrolls, while they did start out as your typical savage orcs, eventually gained a culture of their own, and they are portrayed in Skyrim as a scattered people, reminiscent of Native Americans in American history. While both types of orcs are noted for being powerful and warlike, they are nonetheless shown to have a sense of empathy for the humans of their world and live in a somewhat tense coexistence with them. After all, orcs and humans of the Reach often have more in common than, say, the High Elves of the Thalmor. Also, note that both in Warcraft and Elder Scrolls, orcs are depicted as corrupted creatures through no fault of their own, and only became violent and aggressive through demonic magic in the case of Warcraft orcs, and through being tricked by an evil god in Elder Scrolls. It would be in later games like Lineage and Lineage 2 by NCSoft, a Korean computer game developer, that the idea of orcs would be thrown completely out the window. This is because they started the trend of beautiful female orcs that look more like the gorgeous Amazons found in Wonder Woman comics, rather than the brutal savages their males are often depicted as. Even the male orcs of Lineage 2 received this treatment, becoming much prettier in appearance, unlike the ruggedly handsome orcs found in Warcraft and Elder Scrolls. Created by a god of fire, the orcs of Lineage 2 are still quite savage in combat, but are surprisingly more civilized and have a more organized culture and history. Orcs have been around in literature, tabletop games, computer games, and, just recently, films. There was the film Bright that starred Will Smith, who was partnered with an orc and had to overcome his own prejudice towards his partner. There was the recent adaptation of Warcraft into a film, and I am one of those eagerly awaiting its sequel. In any case, it's very unlikely that we'll see an end to orcs in various media, as works of fantasy are beginning to make a resurgence in literature, games, and hopefully, films. Well, that's it for this episode of Natural Juan, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. See you all in the next video.